Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with Katie Polsky here today. I had the privilege of meeting Katie at the symposium that Teach Us to Worship had in January, but we got to talk very little. And so I'm really excited to get to ask her some questions today and talk to her personally because she wrote the book Beyond the Back Row. And that came out, did that come out last spring, Katie?
It did. Yep, last May. Uh-huh.
Okay, I was thinking in the fall, but then I looked back at my notes and realized, oh no, I read that last spring. So, just a really encouraging book and exciting to think through what it means to be part of the local church and the beauty of it in our lives. So it's an outstanding book, and I'm excited to get to talk to you about that. And I'm also excited because you are a worship leader at your church at Trinity in St. Louis, where your husband is a pastor. I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about that because, like I said, we didn't get much of a conversation when we met each other. But you have been doing that. And so I'm excited to hear about your perspective as a worship leader, how we can encourage other worship leaders who are working to help create the worship environment that does foster intergenerational worship, that helps children be able to worship, and just some thinking through that as we enter into, we're getting ready for Lent and then Easter, and it's a beautiful time in the church. So thank you so much for talking with us
Yeah,
today.
it's a joy to be here with you. Thanks, Heather.
So can you tell me a little bit about your role now and just give me a little background?
Yeah, so Chris and I have been serving together in ministry for as long as we've been married, so just over 25 years. He was a senior pastor in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, before we moved here to St. Louis. I was a music major, intending to I had the desire to be a worship leader from an early age, but when I got to college, I had a knee injury, actually playing basketball, and just came back from a couple surgeries, depressed, and stopped going to music classes. I lost my place in the music program. Somehow came back to college sophomore year, but I had no idea what I wanted to major in. Ended up majoring in English. But before I declared that major, I said I will never touch a piano again. And I did not
Wow.
for a long time. Uh, in God's providence, the English major led me into this path of writing and really opened a door to a passion that I truly did not even know I had. And so God was so kind in that. When we moved to St. Louis in 2007, maybe it was, I could be a little bit off on that. Chris took the role as a senior pastor of a church plant here, and lo and behold, they needed a pianist. I was asked if I would fill in. I was very rusty, but I started here and there just playing. And after a couple of years, the Lord just reawakened that desire in my heart. In 2017, I became the worship director of our church part-time. And that role has morphed now into a full-time position as worship leader and also special events coordinator in our church. But the worship part of my job is my greatest desire or my greatest passion, and I'm just so thankful to the Lord that He fulfilled that longing that started so many years ago. It was a windy path getting there, but I love what I do, and I'm so thankful
Hmm.
that I can say that. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. That is really neat and such a good reminder of how God's working in our lives, even when we don't realize it. So what made you then write your book?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had several conversations with parents, especially, who just felt like the pull of the church was a struggle in this culture. Because there's so many other things going on. How do I stay committed to the church when I have kids' activities, kids' sports, kids' school and club and everything else? Simultaneously, I was mentoring a group of seminary students and other pastors' wives that I had been mentored with, just meeting with differing ages of people in ministry and going into ministry. And I was hearing this common theme of just this feeling of apathy toward the church. Uh, and some of that was kind of coming out of COVID a little bit. But I came home one Sunday after leading worship, and just with this feeling that, Lord, I love my church so much. Why and how did that desire come into my heart, into my life? And so the writing of this book honestly was kind of just an exploration of uh, what the Lord had done in my own life, and then how I have seen him work in and through other parents, worship leaders, pastors, ministry leaders, to kind of just see the church in a new and beautiful way where that's needed. So kind of came out of conversations, and then also just came out of exploring what I had been taught, and how the Lord had worked in my own life when it came to the local church.
I love that. So kind of seeing the benefits of in your own life and then realizing, well, this is right because this is what God intended all along.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's what I feel like when I read your book. Like it's just you have a great perspective because your children are almost out of the house. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. We'll be empty
Okay.
nesters, Lord willing, maybe next fall. I have mixed emotions about it, but there is some excitement about the new season.
Yes, yes, there's the beauty of it and the excitement and also the sorrow and yep, that you hold them both for sure. Yeah, so you've gone through that with your own children and now you have that perspective to be able to share with others too as they're raising their children and just with the church in general of what it means to worship together and the importance. So can you tell me, I don't know if the right question is why, but your first part is why the church?
Hmm.
And why did you start there
Yeah,
as you talk about worship?
another good question. I think before we delve into anything having to do with the church, we have to start with why it's significant. We have to remember as believers uh, what our mission is and why it exists. Uh, it is not just another institution, I believe, like any other club or place that we can join. It is uniquely set apart, and God has given us very clear uh, directives for it. But He's also shown us in His Word His love for His bride. It is so utterly clear. And so as I studied that more and more, the thing that I kept thinking was, Jesus, if you love your church this much, we must strive to love her to the best of our ability and understand, what that means. It's going to look different in each differing context, but what is common is what Jesus says in his word about what his church is, who his bride is, and why he loves her so much.
Hmm. And why do you think, well, I'm just thinking of this myself because at Teach Us to Worship, we're helping families, we're helping children be able to worship. I'm also thinking myself as a 54-year-old empty nester, and some of the struggles that parents will say, it's just hard to get all my kids to church. And I think, you know what? It is still hard at 54. At 54 years old, there are a lot of Sundays that my husband and I would love to say, let's just stay home. Let's read the Bible together. Let's
Yeah.
just have our time. Why do you think it's such in my opinion, I think it's kind of a lifelong struggle. And why do you think that is?
Yeah. Well, I think this is in one way how the enemy works, right? Is just pulling us away from anything that is going to lean us into Jesus. And I think we see that in all sorts of realms, even when we feel like we're in a season of difficulty and challenging. I have a friend right now who's just facing a very challenging season, and her instinct is to stay away from worship. That's not uncommon. Again, I would say be careful because the enemy can tempt us toward anything that is going to pull us away from our relationship with Jesus. And I believe worship is the exact thing that pushes us in. For families, especially those with younger children, anything that we value as parents, our kids are going to learn to value. And again, I go back to what Jesus says in the Word, that he died for his church and established her for his glory, for the advancement of his kingdom, and for our good. And so if we believe that to be true, then we as parents need to value it even when it's hard. It doesn't mean anything that is good in life is going to take effort and work and discipline. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy getting there. I can tell you from experience, and I understand still, but when I was not working in the church and my husband was a senior pastor, oh my goodness, getting to young kids by myself to church for some reason, school, it was like easier, but just getting them out for worship was its own unique struggle. So however, if we value that, if we believe that it's good and right for us and for our children and for the next generation, then we have to make it a priority and in obedience, be there as much as we're able, knowing that there's a reason that God would have us be there, and believe also that he's going to use that in your family, in your child's spiritual walk, in your own spiritual walk. I don't know if you've had this, but some of the Sundays when I'm like, I just don't know. And then you go like, Lord, thank you. Thank you for meeting me there. I needed that. And I didn't know I needed that.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's hard.
Yes,
It's not always easy.
it's hard, and it's the beauty of the long haul too. I think when our kids are little, it's hard to see the future. We think we're never going to sleep at night. We're never going to be able to walk out of the house without tying shoes and all the different things. But it is a long haul, and it's worth it. I love that you said, the Sundays where you just see God working. You know that He's used this in your life, and we look to that. Even when there are Sundays that aren't like that, and we go home frazzled, we still know this is what God is. This is His means of grace. And I think one thing I've always appreciated is just the support of the church family with me, to see other ones there frazzled or coming in late, or all the things and they get to minister to me and remind me that God is faithful and good and worthy of our weekly worship together. I want to give you a quote from your book. Let me pull it up here, that you talk about, several places you talk about intergenerational worship, and I love it. On page 110, you say, one of the greatest gifts in God's church is the opportunity to love intergenerationally. It's quite a different thing to say that your church is multi-generational than it is to say that it's intergenerational. Multi-generation merely means that differing generations are present. Generational implies that they are interacting in some way. In a multi-generational church, it's easy to seek out relationships in the church with only those in the same stage of life, and those kinds of friendships are certainly important. There is something to be said about investing in relationships with those who are in the trenches with you, so to speak. And yet, if we limit ourselves to building relationships in the church with only those who are like us or in the same stage of life as us, we might miss out on the benefits of intergenerational relationships, including mentorship, necessary perspective, and uniquely effective service. And I love that idea. I've thought a lot about what it means, the difference between intergenerational and multi-generational. Can you speak to that with your own personal experience?
Yeah, I think of the intergenerational relationships as the generations overlapping. So not just being present next to each other, but somehow overlapping. And worship is one of the most beautiful places I think that we see that happen. I had pew parents. I think I talk about this in the book. I had pew parents when I was younger. My father was a pastor and my mom sang in the choir, and so they were both occupied on Sunday mornings. But our pew parents brought us Cheerios, and then as we got older, even yummier snacks. Like my pew parents were the first person to introduce me to fruit roll-ups. I will never forget. We discovered very quickly that they were too loud, but they brought books and little gifts, they were also the ones who taught me how to open a hymn and find a hymn or a place in the Bible where the pastor was talking about. My children also had the opportunity to have pew parents. In fact, even still today, when my young adults are back at our church worshiping, they go to find their pew mom, whom they love dearly. But that overlap, that was intentional overlap of relationships. And the reality is, it is easier, it's less messy to engage only with people in our stage of life. But when you do that, I think you miss out on the opportunity to learn from even the youngest child to the oldest congregant. And don't think that there isn't something to learn from the littlest in our church. I sit almost every week right in front of this young child, and the way that they express just uninhibited worship before God just is a reminder for me. Yes, I have uninhibited access to God, and why do I sometimes respond so formally? Let me learn from this child behind me. And then when you have an opportunity to mentor and love on someone who's younger, that can have eternal benefits, much like my pew parents. But I think the key is placing yourself in places where you're surrounded by those older and by those younger. And worship, frankly, is one of the easiest places to do that because you have all ages represented. What other place in life do we have an infant and a 90-year-old in the same room in engaging in the same practices and singing and worship? It is just a picture of heaven. It's beautiful.
I totally agree. I love that so much. Yeah, it's so true. It made me think of just this Sunday. I was visiting my daughter's church in Alabama and just sitting there waiting for the service to start and watching a little 2-year-old walk in. And the beauty to me, just to be reminded of God's faithfulness to generations, that this tiny little one was coming in with their parents. Yeah, it's just such an important thing that not only do children benefit when they're with us, but we benefit and need them. There are many times I see in a service, as you said, the exuberance or even the crying or something that sometimes, we just need to be reminded that's who we are. We are God's children. And yeah, so that's awesome. So can you tell me then, as a worship leader, how does that impact? Because to me, that's the hard part. Now we're thinking of worship being formative for all God's people as we gather together, and you do such a good job of explaining the importance of the local church and us gathering. But then you also carry the weight of being a worship director as you're thinking through, okay, so how am I going to help this happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I For me as a worship leader, one of the key things that I think about every single week in picking music in particular, but this has to do, I think, even with the liturgy. But if in thinking about the music, uh, we should be singing songs that are theologically sound and musically hospitable. The songs that we sing, those truths sink deep into our hearts. And so for me, it's important that all ages are able to sing the song that I pick. That's the musical hospitality. Hospitality, there we go. That it is easy enough for a young child to catch on to, and delightful enough for someone who's been singing their whole life just to be able to sing out, but also then theologically sound enough, not just enough, that is strongly theologically sound, so that when those truths sink in, and they will, and they do, we know that, right? We can sing songs that we learned when we were 5 years old, that they are truths that resonate and speak to our heart. I have little musical notes all throughout my Bible of places where a scripture passage will remind me of a song that I learned. And interestingly, sometimes I'll come across a passage and think, oh, that's where the artist got the lyrics. So see, what's happening is I learned the theological truth from the song before I even understood its meaning in the context of the Bible. So for worship leaders, it's important that both are true, that we are bringing our congregation, every age in mind, as best as we're able, to Jesus through musically hospitable melodies and song. Also balancing that they are songs that aren't watered down theologically, but speak true truth about who God is and what he has done for us.
Do you have any tips on, I don't know if tips is the right word, but any practical ways that you think through that or that you do that? I'm thinking of like even a hymn that might be more difficult, but that has deep theological truth and that actually really ministers, especially to some of the older people, that you say, this, let's say A Mighty Fortress is Our God or something like that, that has deep roots and meaning, and we want our young generation to learn it, but it can be really tricky.
Yeah,
How do you work through that as you're thinking about that?
yeah, there's a lot of different ways, but repetition, especially for young people, but also for us who are older, is so helpful. So even if it's sending out a song, whether it's a hymn or worship song ahead of time for your congregation to listen to, it's also helpful if there is either a story behind a hymn that you're going to introduce, or and you can find those all over the place. Great books that tell hymn stories as well, and even some of our more modern hymns that are being written by people like the Gettys and Indelible Grace, who rewrites old hymns to more singable tunes. You can find the stories behind those hymns, even the newer ones. So sending out also something that your family or parents can read to their kids to say, hey, we're going to sing this Sunday. Listen to what this is about. It helps them connect a little bit more when they've heard a story about what a song is. So some of that can be done ahead of time. Can also ask your children's directors in some capacity, whether it's in a Sunday school or children's church, to talk about a hymn that might, like A Mighty Fortress is a great example. Who knows what a bulwark is? What in the world is that word? But even just maybe picking a phrase or two and saying, hey, we're focusing on this hymn during whatever it might be, Missions Week or whatever. Would you mind showing a couple pictures of some of the words in your Sunday school class? Amazingly, the kids, they'll hear it. And you will hear them even say, we did something similar to this. And I heard a child say at the conclusion of a song, I know what a bulwark is, just this, I know what that is. Do you, Mom and Dad? Or in a children's sermon, things like that. So repetition, singing things several times for the sake of your whole congregation, and then thinking through ahead of time, especially when you're introducing a new song that might take a little while, both giving them something that they can listen to learn it, and also the reason behind the song helps to reinforce, I think, sometimes those truths. Yeah.
I love that. And I love that story because I think it also, when a child says, I know that, they feel like they belong. They know that I'm part of this. And that is that's what we want. We want them to know that they're part of it. One of the children's ministry people recently just told me they were reading the curriculum in children's worship, and it was about God's people and who they are. And she said, you all are part of the church and are just as important as everyone else. And the little girl said, I am, and then they had a chance to like think through and, but it was shocking I think she was like 4 years old, and she said, I'm important here, like it just really struck her. And so it's so much fun for them. I think you're right. I think when we can use repetition and when we can be intentional, it does lead to children and all people. When we repeat, it helps us too. It helps me if I keep repeating it to actually be able to learn the song. So, yeah. So can you help us now kind of think through the season we're moving into, Lent and then Easter, and just starting with Lent, that can be a hard time. I think a lot of times we think, well, we better not have children if we have if we have a Wednesday Lent service, we better make sure we either tell parents this, might not be a good one to bring your kids, or let's make sure we have plenty of nursery volunteers. And then even thinking through that time period when we're in that season, can you give us some ways as a worship leader that we can consider the generations as we move into that season?
Yeah, I think this is important for worship leaders and for parents. And I think one of the most important things in thinking about the leading into this season is to start with formation, not performance. So the important shift is remembering that worship isn't something that we watch, it's something that we're formed by. And that includes children. God delights to work through ordinary means, even when children don't fully understand everything yet. I truly believe that He does that. He works through just the rhythms. So even an infant just starting every week to be a part of worship, I believe that the Lord works through that. Those are rhythms that the Lord is uniquely working in that child. So instead of asking, when it comes to something like Lent, instead of starting with the question, can kids grasp Lent? I would say shift the question and say, how is God shaping them through confession and silence and lament? Children don't need to comprehend every word in order to meaningfully participate. They need to know, and you just said this, that they belong. And we show them that they belong by ways that, Heather, you just mentioned, by bending down and asking them, how was school this week? By praying for them in the pastoral prayer. But it's important that they know that their presence in every service that is important. So we don't want to have I would say, special children's services during the season of Lent, just because that maybe isn't a place that they belong. No, they do. In particular, during this season, I think one of the ways that we can make them feel a part of the service is by doing things that are uniquely tangible. So, for example, our church this year is using ribbons. So every congregant, from the littlest to the oldest, will receive a little black ribbon and a little purple ribbon. And we'll explain, so it's something that they can hold. And we'll explain in the service that the black represents our sin, and the purple is about our pain and lament. And the pastor or worship leader will walk through what those words mean. And then we'll come forward and actually we'll pin them onto a cross. And then on Easter morning, when they come in, they will be all white ribbons. And we did this one year also with rocks. So same concept, but we all took a small rock and wrote just a sin that we were really struggling with in that season. And we brought them forward and we piled them up. And on Easter morning, there were flowers just sprouting all throughout, the rocks. So it's this tangible thing. But I will never forget when we did the rocks. After that particular service, people had kind of filtered out. And this child was standing over the rocks, and he had his hands behind his back, and he was just looking over the pile. And I said, hey, Connor, what you doing? And he was quiet in a minute, and he breathed in and he said, Mrs. Polsky, I smell sin. And I thought, oh my goodness, you might be just kind of joking. He didn't laugh, but also what a cool picture that the worship service utilizes all of our senses. And in that moment, for him, it was like, he had just experienced touch and seeing and smelling and, just all of the senses being involved. But I think especially during this season, whatever we can do to make something tangible, it's not just good for our kids. That is good for our adults too. And if it doesn't fit in your worship service, this is something you can incorporate in a Sunday school classroom or children's church or even at home. But just using those tangible expressions are beautiful, and they're intergenerational. So that's something I would keep in mind.
I love that. Those are great, great pictures. And yes, I think they help everyone for sure. That is really beautiful. As you're thinking of that, I think you just gave some really clear ideas that are very doable that would help everybody. how do you how what would you say? One thing I don't want is for worship leaders to feel like, because this is a big season, and as you enter into Easter, there's a lot of thinking through, who the people are going to be that play the music, and getting choirs ready, and all very beautiful and important things.
Yes.
How do we encourage worship leaders as they're because some of them may have not even thought intergenerationally, like, so rather than pile on, okay, so now let's do this, how do we encourage? And just from your experience, do you have any encouraging stories or ideas that can uplift worship leaders as they get ready for this very busy season, that's important?
Yes, yes. Well, I can empathize. We are right now in the trenches of getting our music and everything ready for Good Friday and for Easter and everything else that precedes that. So it is a busy time. I'd say utilize what you already have in front of you, rather than adding on to it. So, in other words, how, especially if you're starting new with some of these concepts, how can you utilize the giftedness of your children's leaders to kind of connect? What maybe it's a song. Just thinking about, okay, how will the children respond to this song, and how can I maybe ask, some help or partnership with the children's leaders. So that's kind of bringing someone else alongside rather than piling on maybe more, especially at this point, because I know plans are kind of already in the works, but something, there's things that you can think of for the future. The other thing is, you have in your choir worship team, with your instrumentalist, parents represented. I'm pretty sure. So you have a discipleship opportunity even to remind them. So that's not necessarily, that's just, as worship leaders, you kind of have this amazing discipleship platform, just to say, during this season, we want your children to come to this Good Friday service as well. Help me understand what would be helpful from you as parents. And also, by way of encouragement, we want your children here. You say that to them. I think it's important that we're not talking, children don't need simpler theology, they need clear theology. And so sometimes it's even just explaining what a song means to the parents, so that the parents can in turn do that for their children. So you kind of have a built-in platform to be able to do that. When I'm talking to my choir about why we're singing what we're singing, maybe just add in a word of encouragement. Feel free to tell your kids what you just learned today that was new and unique about this particular song having to do with the cross. So sometimes it's not just, okay, what else do I have to do? And more just, how can I just do what I'm doing? But also just add in that extra layer of, oh, and also remind your children, utilizing parents. Oh, and also the children of the church, utilizing your children's leaders. But be encouraged. The Lord is going to use, he's going to use you to influence the varying generations as you do what you do for his glory.
Hmm. And that is the beauty of it, that he is using these simple things and the ways. I love that idea. I love that idea of just being with the people that you're already working with and serving, and just reminding, because we all need to remind each other. I sat in Bible study today with the women, and we just reminded each other of the importance of being part of God's family, as we looked at the story of Jonathan and David, and just thought, they had this covenant relationship, and that is what God calls us to with each other in the church. We are in a covenant relationship with each other, and how that can be very difficult, but how beautiful it is, and how honoring it is that God calls us to that. Even though he knows we're not going to do it well a lot of times, he doesn't say, well, you all should be in relationships with each other, but since you're not very good at it, we're just going to put that aside. And instead he says, I want you to have this. You're going to see me in this. And when it falls apart, or when there are really hard things, I'm going to be there and I'm going to walk you through
Amen.
it. So I just love that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, do you have any other words of kind of, I love what you've said as a worship director, and thank you so much. I just think that's so encouraging to our worship directors who are going to be are already very busy and are going to be getting a lot of things ready. Do you have any words also as a parent,
Mm.
which you've already spoken to too, but just another continued encouragement as parents get ready to walk through the story of Easter and what Jesus has done for their children and celebrate that with them. Any encouragement for them?
Yeah. Yeah, this is one that it can be tricky, right? Because the crucifixion is a hard thing to talk about with our children. I'm thinking of that in particular, but as I said, I'm going to repeat it. Kids don't need simpler theology; they need clear theology. So don't hide away, them from things like the crucifixion. Obviously, we want to be age appropriate, but I wouldn't say just automatically because they're kids. I won't bring them to a Good Friday service. Do what you can to be clear about why we mourn our sin and how Jesus paid the penalty for it, and talk about it personally. I think sometimes we forget that even our littles can grasp that, oh, mom and dad had to learn. I think one of the best lessons that my father, who was a pastor his whole life until he went to be with Jesus, the best thing he said to me, he used to read Proverbs at nighttime for us for devotions and then ask us to work through what the proverb meant. And one night I thought, oh, I'm going to turn the tables on him. And I opened the Bible and read the most obscure proverb I could find, which was something about the ring in the pig's snout. And I said, there we go, Dad. You tell me what that means. And you know what he said? I don't know. He said, let's figure it out together. And it was literally this moment that I looked at him, I'm, oh, you're human and you don't know all the things. So I think just sometimes bringing our kids alongside of us as we learn, that's discipleship. And then also just remember, as parents, concrete explanations help us as much as they help our kids. So if the idea of fasting comes up, for example, during Lent, that can be a hard concept, but we can explain it and have them practice it on their level. I think we automatically think kids don't need to have anything to do with fasting. Well, they can understand the concept of giving something up in order to remember that we need Jesus more than anything else.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes forcing us to explain some of the concepts that we learn about during this season or that we're reminded of during this season are just as helpful for us. You know, it's so helpful when a kid says, Mom, what is fasting? Because it makes you go, wait, what is fasting? But yeah, just bringing them in on their level as much as we're able to. And one other quick thing I'd say, and this has to do with Good Friday, Easter, and every other Sunday. And it's because I'm a worship leader. But parents, sing in church. And I know sometimes that there are seasons when you just need to soak in the words, or your tears, you just can't get the words out, and that's okay. The Lord knows. But when you are able, sing. God commands it. If you didn't know this, over 50 times in the Bible, the command sing is there. So whether you have a good voice or not, and here's the thing, I don't. I'm a worship leader who does not have a mic in front of me because I don't have a great leading voice. But I'll tell you, you can't stop me from singing out unabashedly, because that is how I am able to declare my praise to my Savior. That's one of the ways, at least. But I think when we do that, when we sing out of sincere praise to Jesus, our kids are learning. The next generation is learning, oh, I don't have to just stand stiff. Or, okay, they see the dichotomy when we sing out in our car, but when we're very quiet in our church. So we don't put on a performance for them, but merely just ask the Lord to help you, help me, Jesus, where I feel very insecure when it comes to worship. And just let me give that to you so that you might be glorified, so that my heart might be open to you, and so that my kids can learn what it means to stand before the throne and worship their Father. So that applies to all year around, but it's something I feel passionate about.
I love that. I mean, it makes me even think of myself and just being in service with everyone and thinking, wow, it does matter. It matters that I lift my voice. It matters that I'm singing. It affects more than just me, but all of us, and we're meant to be that way as the body of Christ. So that's awesome. Katie, it's such a delight. Thank you so much. Now I wish we had more hours to spend and just have coffee together. Maybe someday we'll get that opportunity. I'm so excited that you are also heading up with Cheryl Mullis, the wives of, is it we, which is the wives of elders and
Yep.
pastor. Okay,
Yep.
okay, yes, yes. So that is really exciting that y'all are doing that together. I just finished a Bible study this morning with Cheryl, so I'm so excited for you all to be working together and see what the Lord does with that. That's awesome. So thank you so much, Katie, for being with us. And again, y'all get her book and read it with, I would say read it with some generations. As I read it, I thought, well, I wish I was reading this with my daughters or with some younger friends at church. It would just be a real encouragement to sit and read together with different generations who can say, yes, that is true. I've seen that, or, yeah, all the different things. So thank you, Katie.
Praise the Lord. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yes, yes.